This doesn't work either. Okay. The microphone is broken, but we're going to start the budget hearing and the Meet the Candidates night, and we'll begin with the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Kasseri?
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Mullen. Very nice to have everyone here tonight. We have a nice crowd for our annual budget hearing, where we're going to have an opportunity to go over the proposed school budget for the 23-24 school year. And then as well, we have an opportunity to meet the candidates who are running for school board. We offer the Meet the Candidates night, so our students here at Lewiston-Porter, kind of led by the PTSA, will be asking questions that they generated in their participation in government classes, and it'll give the community an opportunity to understand a little better some of the positions that these candidates have as they come into the role of school board member. I want to thank Mr. Nick Hill, our Director of Technology. So this is being live streamed. Our school budget hearing is being live streamed tonight, as well as our Meet the Candidates night, and on our Lewiston-Porter YouTube channel. And it will also be available on the website after tonight, right up through the budget vote and board election, so that people can click on it, and if they want to continue to listen or perhaps go back and understand better something that was stated tonight regarding either the budget or what one of the candidates mentioned. We did send out postcards. We wanted to make sure that tonight's budget hearing and Meet the Candidates night was more fully advertised, and it looks like we did a decent job because we have a little bit of a crowd tonight. We haven't had a crowd in some years, so obviously I hope that as a result of our sending out the postcards and advertising a little bit the budget hearing, we are able to have some members of our community who are interested in knowing a little bit more about the school budget. The school budget is always an arduous process that we begin as a board governance team in January. Each year, it becomes harder and harder because, as I mentioned in what the community will receive in the budget newsletter, and it was also a bit mentioned in the Sentinel, revenue is always difficult each year. Costs continue to rise at a geometric, if not an exponential rate. And for us to continue to maintain all of the wonderful programming that we have here at Lewiston-Porter, and yet we, unlike other districts, neighboring districts, we are receiving fewer and fewer state dollars to support our school budget. At the same time, we're limited in terms of the taxes that we're able to raise. We're not interested in keeping tax rate low, number one, but number two, New York State has what's called a tax cap. And so there's only a certain rate that you're able to raise each year based on that tax cap. So we're kind of proud of this budget. As many of you know, our school district has seen declining enrollment over years. This year, we had 19 retirements. And so we've been able to use those retirements to kind of right size. So we cut back a significant number of teaching positions and other positions across the district, but we're able to do that through attrition, so nobody had to be laid off. So we're kind of able to right size, and that's how we were able to close a significant budget gap this year. So budget to budget, it's one of our smallest increases, 2.71, despite inflation, despite some of the pressures, the budget to budget increase from last year's budget to this year's budget was only 2.71. And we're only going to be asking of the taxpayers a 2.65% increase in the levy this year, which is well below the tax cap, and certainly, as you are all aware, if you've watched Bloomberg or any other business channel, well below what's called the Consumer Price Index, which is completely out of control. So we're pretty proud of the work that we did on this budget this year. We're obviously reducing staff, actually bringing in and maintaining some programming to support student learning that we had established through some of the COVID federal dollars that are falling off this year, and maintaining some of our award-winning programs. So I would like to introduce our newest newest administrator to the district at the district office level, and that's Dr. Michael Lewis, who is our Assistant Superintendent for Administrative Services. He is really the financial guy when it comes to working with me and and Dr. Lyon and the school board, along with the administrators, to establish the budget. And he's done a really nice job this year. I'm very happy and pleased at the work that he's done. So without further ado, Dr. Lewis is going to dig into some of the specifics. Dr. Lewis?
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to take this because. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm glad to see that the students are here, and even though we're not in school, you're still sitting as far away from the teacher as possible. So, thanks, Nick. As Mr. Casari said, I'm very excited to see some of those nice things in my evaluation. I'm here today to present the public budget for next school year, the 23-24 school year. When we developed this budget, essentially we were looking at goals and focus. Our goals are always to deliver a fiscally responsible budget. We're looking for sustainability of programs. When we do need to make financial choices for our system, we prefer to look away from programming and look to other areas for savings. We want to make sure that we provide a fiscally and emotionally safe environment for students and staff, and we want to focus on our strategic plan and student progress. So as we go through our decision-making process and went through the budget development process this year, we really used the strategic plan as a core focus to make sure that what we're doing and what we're allocating resources to are targeted to the goals and objectives that we've established for ourselves as a school district. As far as our focus goes, we want to make sure that we're providing necessary funding to keep our children safe and secure. That's one example as referenced through our school resource officer program that we initiated this year and that we expanded a little bit to next year. We want to make sure that we are maintaining and ensuring modern school facilities, which you'll see represented in our physical plant and our operations section of the budgets. We want to make sure that funds are directed to increase student learning. That is the thing that we do. We don't make widgets, we make young minds, and we want to make sure that we're spending our dollars focused on student learning and achievement-based outcomes. And also we want to make sure that our social and emotional wellness of our students is secure, and we're focusing on that. I know that it's common to hear that school districts are responsible to do more and more every year, but you know, we are responsible for the whole child, social, emotional, physical, academic, and we really are proud of the budget that we put forward for today's presentation, because it does represent all of those different areas and many different goals targeted towards those. Our proposed budget for next school year really focuses on revenues and expenses. These are the core pieces of our budget. Revenue increases for us are, of course, the tax levy, as Mr. Casari mentioned, also state foundation aid, state building aid, and state BOCES aid. So those are the government resources that are allocated to us based on a formula that I could not begin to explain to you. There's also some revenue decreases. We've recently seen a reduction in day school tuition from other nations and from other school districts. We wanted to make sure there was an accurate representation of those lowered revenue sources. Our earnings are down, with less aid and with less resource for student-based needs comes less revenue in terms of, interest rates, interest we might make on our cash and various accounts, things like that. We haven't really focused on those, and over the last several years, year over year, they've been down. And then also, most importantly for this budget, our COVID grant-based funds are basically depleted. I'll explain those in a little more detail in a minute, but essentially 2 of the 3 grants that we've used to supplement our resources for the last few years are expiring in the next few months, and we didn't want to not account for that in next year's budget. There are, of course, expense increases, just as everyone has in their household, we have in a school system. Our health insurance costs are up, our natural gas and fuel costs are up by over 20% year over year. Our wages and costs of employment are up. Those are reflected in our various collective bargaining agreements, which we are obligated to meet. So all of our expense increases reflect those things that are contractually obligated, as well as our best estimate based on financial factors and year-over-year projections. There are some decreased student expenses as well. For example, these are only a few. Our international student program, for obvious reasons, over the last few years is a little bit lower than it was. So there are some expenses associated with that are down. Things like trash disposal, super exciting things like trash disposal, are down. Like the costs just aren't there anymore. So these are things that are reflected in areas where I can decrease how much we think we're going to spend in certain areas. And I used, for your awareness, a 3-year average projection. So instead of just looking at last year's actuals, I wanted to go back to the year before COVID and then look at our current available data over the last 3 years to be able to make some wider accounting adjustments to make sure that we're reflecting some real changes. And then also, for example, on the instructional side, our activity-based learning rooms we're gonna reduce our budget in that area as well. Our process is much the same this year as it has been in the past. We always start with our strategic plan. I then meet with all building administrators. All school principals are required to develop an expenditure budget for their school based on their needs. There are wants in those requests. There are needs in those requests. We review each one of those individually for each school, whereas in the past there might have been one meeting to review that and then some decisions are made. This year I really focused on getting back into the schools to meet with them individually 2 or 3 times as we refined what those figures looked like. We're pretty happy that in all cases, as is represented in the overall budget, the requests that were made were very reasonable by the principals. They were more than last year, but everything is more than last year in terms of cost, so that made sense. What was nice is that in almost every case we were able to meet those requests and meet those expectations for learning. Our budget process also estimates state aid and projects local revenues. So now, because the budget has actually been approved, well, the last time I presented to you, we did not have a state budget. Now we do. That estimate becomes an actual dollar amount. It is unchanged for us. So our planning was right to the dollar. And then projected local revenues is also part of our budget development process. What do we think our tax rate is going to look like? What do we think pilots will look like in terms of payment in lieu of taxes? What does that revenue look like compared to prior year's revenue? Other revenues, like from very small things like selling scrap metal to more complicated things like how litigation might result in increased district expenses. We also look at the levy. We spent a lot of time at our work sessions looking at the tax levy. The key to remember is that revenues must equal planned expenditures. We must have a balanced budget. We cannot present more expenses than revenue and vice versa. So when we created that tax levy, that was the lowest possible percentage we could get to with all of the other considerations in our development process to be mindful of meeting our goal of student achievement, safe and orderly environment, while also not taxing as much as technically the state would allow. We calculate the tax rate, as all school districts do, by dividing the share of the tax levy into the assessed value of the whole township, Lewiston and Porter. This is done after the budget vote. So when the community and when you look at our budget, that is technically an estimation. It is a good estimate. Your actual bill as a community member would depend on what Lewiston or Porter assesses your property at. The school district has no control over that. We don't have say in that. All we do is we say, this is how much money we're gathering from the tax levy from the community, and we divide by the assessed value, whatever your house is worth, between the assessor and you. That's what we end up sending a bill for. As Mr. Casari pointed out, our proposed tax levy is an increase of 2.65%. That is a total of $29,608,316. That's in consideration of a potential tax levy of 3.12%. So when we do the math behind the tax cap legislation, we were allowed to raise an additional $143,201. We felt that the most fiscally appropriate budget did not go right to the cap. So we essentially are not taxing $143,000 that we could have because we didn't feel it was necessary or appropriate to do so. We're also planning a use of our fund balance. So fund balance are dollars that we already have that we roll into another year. That's another way to reflect savings. These are tax dollars that we don't have to generate. For next year, as has been described in several budget meetings over the last few months, we're planning on appropriating $2.85 million of our existing financial resources into next year's budget for various programming and other needs. On the state aid side, as Mr. Casari pointed out, we actually received one of the lowest increases in all of Niagara County. So when you hear or read about other school districts receiving millions of dollars more because the governor fully funded foundation aid, without getting into the politics of that calculation, the reality is Lewiston-Porter, in a community where millions was the average this year, received $309,006 in added foundation aid. That is the entirety of new money from the state government. That represents a flat 3% increase, whereas other districts were seeing increases in the double digits in many cases. So we work with the dollars we're given. That can't change. We can't make that any different than what it is, and that's an added $309,000 in our revenue through foundation aid. I do want to spend a minute just informing the community and the board about our grant funds. As everyone is aware, the federal government issued Lewiston-Porter around $2.4 million in COVID-related grant funds. We have used that primarily to address safety and environmental needs like cleaning supplies and filter purchasing and things like that, and a significant investment in personnel resources to address learning loss. That was the majority of our funding. All but around $500,000 will be fully expended by September 30th. So all of the $2.4 million is virtually spent. We have a plan for the remaining. We will use all the dollars that we were allocated. But we are also mindful that part of what we need to do is reflect in our current budget the fact that we have priorities that came from COVID that we would like to maintain some of. And that's where we make certain personnel decisions to keep one position versus lose a different position through attrition. So even though we have an overall attrition of about 8 to 10 positions, they might actually look different in each school. It's not just a straight reduction in a staff member. It might be a different program that didn't exist 3 years ago in a different school building. As far as our tri-part budget goes, this is a lot of what the community is going to see in our public mailing that's going to go out soon. We're required to present this information in this way. This is our total budget of $54,593,312. That is 100% of our budget from our tax levy and from state aid resources, as well as other various revenue. Administratively, we're spending about 8.34%. Having been on a board of a not-for-profit, a very good standard for your agency and overhead is about 10%. So comparatively to other entities, we're running pretty well. Programming, remember we're a service industry. You know, we don't make things, we teach kids. So we would have a lot of expenses in services because that's how we provide the services through hiring staff. That represents about 67% of our budget. And then our capital project, our capital improvement areas, this is maintaining all of our facilities, covering legal fees, paying for insurance, all of our buildings and grounds, the tractor that you saw a few weeks ago. I had to fit it in at one point. That represents about 25% of our overall budget for next year. As far as our fund balances and reserves go, we have a restricted fund balance total of about $3.8 million. This is our savings account. These are funds that are in reserve for specific purposes. Many of them are below. Our assigned appropriated fund balance for next year is $2.85 million. So these are different figures, and these are changing based on actual expenditures through the rest of the year. So this is a best estimate, as we had mentioned before, based on today's dollars. We still have a couple months of school left, so they might change a little bit. We can say for sure, though, that of our existing savings, $2.85 million will be accounted for in next year's budget. And our other reserves are also presented. We have $1.5 million in savings for our capital projects, future capital projects. That's a great start. We have a couple more years before we're thinking about the next project, and all of the dollars that go into that account are going to save us in interest and count towards our district contributions that we're required to make whenever our next project might be. Our repair reserve, these are emergency repairs that are not regular maintenance kinds of things that come up. We have about $500,000 reserved there for emergency purposes. If anyone's tried to install an industrial size boiler, you'll know that that's not a lot of money. Employee benefits, about $60,000, $400,000 in our retirement contribution reserves. That's both ERS and TRS for next year. Our tax certiorari reserve currently has $1.239 million in it, $1,239,000. And then for debt service purposes, we keep a little bit of cash on hand in case there's some sudden change that we need to account for in the time between when we say we want to go to bond for a project and when we do. If there's some fees that are there or some other costs, we have that in reserve in case. So that way we don't have to access the regular general fund budget. We have savings for that instead. Some budget neutral items. So now that we've talked about all the expenses and all of the revenue, things that we do that don't cost us money. Universal pre-K, 100% funded by the state and county. Something that I'm particularly excited about as a former special education person. I got to work a lot with Lynn Hewitt, our new special ed director, to create what's called a SKIZ class. This is an integrated special class in preschool that will allow 8 students in our district who are students with disabilities at preschool to stay in district and receive special ed services in our school pre-K building as opposed to needing to go somewhere else. Beyond that, we're also going to be able to add a couple of aides in the pre-K program. So what's really great about this is we're merging the revenue that we receive from these programs to add support for new general education kids to come in. So where we had a maximum number of students by regulation for preschool, we now have a higher number because more people than we used to have asked to send their child to our pre-K program. The district has found some resources in our budget to be able to increase staffing and allow that number to get up so nobody had to lose out on a spot. Textbooks, software and hardware, school library funding, all expense-driven state aid defined by the number of students that we have enrolled. So while that number changes from year to year, it's the same dollar amount, and that's all based on, we spend every dollar that we get in that area, do not worry. School lunch program is also self-sustaining, but it's subsidized by federal funds. So, you know, for several years, but during COVID, there were no costs. For years before, we had not raised rates. We increased our school lunch rate a little bit this year. We have no plans on changing anything. We've actually already submitted our documents that the school lunch program costs will not change for next school year. And that's based on usage, and we receive some federal subsidies to support that. We are required by law to run that program in the black, so to speak. We're not allowed to run a deficit, and we haven't. That program also pays for itself in terms of costs associated with equipment, with repairs, for replacement of items. We don't actually use school district resources if one of the dishwashers breaks. We use school lunch money. That's a separate and distinct set of funds. Just some quick facts for the budget for this year. Keep in mind, year over year, when we've heard a different number for overall inflation every week, it seems, in the press. We're required to look at January to January for the budget documents and budget prep. So January 22 to January 23, the inflation rate was 6.4%. Our budget is coming in at 2.71%. So in context of that, we're well less than what the rate of inflation would be for any particular regular expense. That's on top of a tax levy that's only 2.65% higher. So again, even though we could have asked for 3.12, we didn't feel it was prudent to need that, so we asked for 2.65. And that is even below well below rate of inflation and below our budget increase, which is not always what we see. As far as taxes goes, the estimate for today, based on our current budget and current assessed values, is roughly 54 cents per thousand of assessed value in Lewiston and 47 cents per thousand of assessed value in Porter. And everyone, don't forget, Tuesday, May 16th. I can't tell you how to vote, but I can ask you to vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis. This is a open public budget hearing, so if anybody in the audience has a question regarding the school budget or anything that was presented, you are welcome to step forward. Please ask your question, state your name, your address, and ask your question, and either myself or Dr. Lewis or any of the board would be glad to answer. So if anybody would like to step forward and ask a question, you are welcome to do so right now.
My name is Joe Palermo, 4569 Porter Center Road. Mr. Casera, you had mentioned that the COVID relief funds are ending, but you didn't say when.
So a significant portion of them, Dr. Lewis mentioned, about 1.9 million of them will need to be expended by September 30 of this year.
Okay.
And that leaves about 500,000, and we have that budgeted for next year in terms of math and ELA and other supports that we've
Oh, that was my next question. Yeah. So, what percentage of that was the annual budget, the COVID relief funds? What was it?
So that was about a 0.5%.
0.5%. Yeah, it was pretty low, right?
Total dollars, yes.
All right. Just one more question. I apologize. You had mentioned learning loss.
Correct.
That is. Can you just explain that a little bit to me?
Yeah, so we do quite a bit of diagnostic testing through what we use through what's called independent reading level assessment,
Right.
IRLA, where we assess students and their reading levels. We also use Ames web testing that's done, and then of course we have our state testing where we get data as well. Particularly with our IRLA testing in grades K through 6, we saw significant declines in student reading levels, and so as well as through Ames web, we saw significant
Right.
declines in student math learning. We added in math interventionists. We refocused some of our work with our reading teachers and
Right.
some of our curriculum and those kinds of pieces to address that learning loss. We also, if you recall, for 2 summers, we offered summer programs at the elementary level to address
Right.
that.
So that will lead into my next question. So you said that was funded by the COVID relief funds.
Correct.
So it's in the budget this year. You had mentioned that earlier. That
So last year was the last year we ran the summer programs. We've kept the interventions
okay, I got you.
program in the budget.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other members of our community wish to ask any questions? Sure.
Bruce Newton, 373 Riverview Drive, Youngstown. My question is, based on, I think, one of the earlier community awareness meetings and the discussion we're having tonight, this formula that New York State uses for tax money allocation, I remember you mentioned at the awareness meeting was put in place when Eliot Spitzer was governor.
Yes.
So, I mean, I can't remember how old that is. Let's just say 20 years. And my general feeling is so much has changed at Lewiston-Porter, decrease in enrollment, community, what do you call it, just business revenues that starts to have gone down, and I think we're being unfairly served by that old formula.
We are.
So my question is, what can we do about it, or what are you doing about it?
I appreciate that question. Yes, so the formula that is used to determine our state aid is 17 years old. It was developed under the Spitzer administration, and there, of the 764, 65 school districts in New York State, about 265 of them were considered in an overfunded state, Lewiston-Porter being one of those school districts. So we have always received what's called a hold harmless increase. Have received the minimum increase, where you have seen significant other state aid increases in neighboring school districts. The reason for that is because of the 17 years ago, the wealth ratio that Lewiston-Porter was established on. For instance, those children on free and reduced lunch. When the formula was established, we had about 8 or 9% of our students on free and reduced lunch. Currently, right now, we are pushing 30% of our students on free and reduced lunch. So our school community has gotten poorer, yet that's not reflected in the formula. I have advocated with Senator Ort, with Senator Morinello, with Assemblyman Morinello, Assemblyman Norris, regarding this issue. I have a meeting set up once again this summer with Assemblyman Morinello, who is very interested in bringing forward a proposal in the legislature to rework the formula. The formula is set at the budget and it's really part of that whole process that you just saw play out with the state in terms of policy that's established within the budget. So it's going to require all of the state legislature and the governor to get behind a rework of the formula. That is going to have to happen. Until that happens, Lewiston-Porter is always going to be in a hold harmless position in terms of state aid. So we need to continue to advocate. I'll continually advocate through my state organization, the New York State Council of School Superintendents. We need to continue to advocate through NYSBA, the New York State School Boards Association, which we're members of. The PTSA has a lobby day, and we've worked with them to advocate for a change in this formula. There was some momentum this year, but this year the governor decided to take a look back and more or less fully fund the current formula. That has now been fully funded. So all of those school districts that received that huge amounts of state aid, that is money that, quote, was owed them over this 17 years because the formula had not been fully funded. So we'll see now, those school districts are going to see significant decline in state aid funding because they received such huge increases over this past couple years as the formula was fully funded. So everybody's we're going to get our hold harmless amount, whatever that ends up being in next year's budget. The state comptroller, we also are concerned, obviously, as you know, that the budget, the economics are always cyclical. So we'll start to see some impact of CPI and reduced consumer spending and those kinds of things in the next few budgets. So I am concerned about state aid and state aid funding. So it's really incumbent upon us. At my district key communicators meeting, I encourage anybody to come to a district key communicators meeting. We generally always have a representative from Assemblyman Morinello's office, Senator Ort's office, and it's a chance we can talk with them about this issue, and they can hear from the community as well about how we need to focus on getting that formula reworked as part of next year's budget process. So that's kind of where we're at. Well, because the current formula had never been fully funded. And so of those, you remember I said about 500 and some odd, the majority were owed a significant amount of money based on it. So there was no way they were going to rework that until they got their money. Any other questions from the community? Sir, come on forward, please. And state your name and your address and ask your question.
John Venet, I live at 4020 Creek Road, across the street. Just a question on enrollment keeps going down. I was just wondering what the cost per pupil is from last year to this year. And then you have solar panels I don't see going up yet. Is that going to be a cost savings when they start producing?
Let me grab the microphone.
Sure.
I can, yeah, go right ahead. Our cost per pupil, Dr. Lewis, if you have that number, if you could just quickly look that, I want to make sure it's accurate. We have that number through the state. Obviously, with declining enrollment, our cost per pupil has largely remained the same. There has been incremental increase, but it's our cost per pupil is not out of line with other school districts in the area and throughout the state. So, but we'll get that number for you. Do you have it?
19,609 based on the last.
19,609, and that's for just for a regular education student. That's not a special education student. Could be up in the 26, 28,000 range, yes. Do you have that number, Dr. Lewis, special education number? It's significant. It's significant. The other piece of your question, the solar panels, yes. We're hoping the solar panels come online sometime in June. We're still waiting for the National Grid to put up a pole and make the final hookup. And then there's some process with National Grid. We were very disappointed. We had hoped that those would be online back in December. But unfortunately, National Grid has been very slow to move in terms of, and as you can probably imagine, if we're generating power, there's some, issues ultimately with the grid with that. But hopefully, we're going to get those online soon. And yes, we do hope to see cost savings. So so about 30,000 for special education students. We have 312. 312? About 312 special education students. The percentage would be about around 1,900 students, so 312 divided by 1,900. What do you got there, Dr. Lewis? 16%, which is about we're a little bit below the state average. I think the state average is 18%. Yeah, significant cost. Significant cost. Any other questions? Very good. Thank you so much. This was I think our most interactive budget hearing, so hopefully our postcards made a difference and hopefully create a little information for folks. So we are going to transition to our Meet the Candidates night. And so I'm going to ask Mr. Wagaman, Mr. Palermo, and Ms. Mullen if they'd like to take their seats. And I'll ask Mrs. Violante, and it looks like just one student is going to be the moderator and asking all the questions, Bryn Townsend, who's an excellent moderator. So we'll have her asking the questions. Right here. And so your camera's right there, and the candidates have their camera.
Marissa takes good care of us.
Welcome to the 2023 Lew-Port Meet the Candidates Night for the Board of Education election. My name is Allison Violante, and I am the PTSA Vice President and will be your event moderator this evening. This event is a cooperative effort between the Lewiston-Porter School District, the High School Social Studies Department, and the 12th grade students of Lew-Port. This is an activity that not only shows the great cooperation between these groups, but also provides a valuable learning opportunity for Lew-Port students as they learn about the election process and how to become an educated voter. The format for tonight's event will be as follows. The candidates are seated in the order in which they will appear on the ballot. Each of the three candidates will have 3 minutes for an opening statement about their candidacy. Candidates will be asked 3 questions drafted by the students and the Lew-Port PTSA. The candidates will answer in rotating order and will have up to 2 minutes to answer the question. I, as the moderator, will keep the time and inform you when your time is up. We respectfully request that you stick to the agreed time frames. Once all the questions have been asked, candidates will have 2 minutes for a closing statement in the opposite order of the opening statements to close out your thoughts. Please welcome our 3 candidates, Danielle Mullen, Jack Wagaman, and Joseph Palermo. Tonight we have Lew-Port High School student Bryn Townsend joining us with questions for the candidates. Bryn is the class president. She is a cheer team member and will be attending American University in the fall. We will now begin opening statements. Danielle Mullen, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I believe our students are the future and deserve the very best we can offer them. The academic success and overall well-being of our children is so incredibly important. It is critical that the Board of Education be thoughtful and dedicated to making the best decisions possible for our community. I feel so fortunate to have been a part of the Board of Education for the past 4 years and would like to continue to volunteer my time in serving the community. I started to become involved within the schools when my oldest child entered kindergarten in 2008. I volunteered in the classrooms, and that led into volunteering with the PTSA. I spent many years serving in a variety of different roles within the PTSA, including being president. These years were invaluable for learning about the values and priorities of our schools pre-K through 12 from the wonderful and dedicated administration, faculty, staff, and families in our community. My time on the board has been spent trying to learn as much as possible about our role within the district and the larger community. I have had the honor of serving as president the past 2 years and was vice president the year prior to that. In addition to these leadership experiences, I have learned a great deal from serving on district committees. I am currently involved in the following committees: policy, special education, finance, district-wide safety, and strategic planning. I have also attended multiple conferences to further my knowledge base in Board of Education work, including educational law conferences and New York State School Board Association annual conventions. I currently serve as the Niagara-Orleans School Board Association representative for Lewiston-Porter and will also be representing our district for the next 3 years on the Niagara-Orleans BOCES board. I'm truly passionate about helping all students, and I have learned about varying student perspectives by being involved in my own children's education. I have 4 children spanning a wide range of age, interests, and abilities, 3 currently attending Lewiston-Porter schools, and 1 recent 2022 graduate. These experiences, coupled with my formal educational training, help me carefully analyze district decisions. I believe nothing is more important than truly listening intentfully and thoughtfully. I would consider it a great privilege to be able to continue to serve the Lewiston-Porter community on the Board of Education.
Thank you. Jack Wagaman, you have, oh wait. There we go. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Jack Wagaman. I am a candidate for the Lewiston-Porter Board of Education. Real quick, I just want to thank Danielle and Joe for also running to volunteer their time. It kind of feels like a skid up here, like I'm the middle guy in an airplane row, you know, the biggest guy's in the middle. So I'm sorry, I need some extra room. So I wanted to say first and foremost, thank you to the PTSA for running this, to getting us out there, to introducing us, and to let our voices be heard. Thank you to the community that showed up this evening, the Board of Education that volunteers their time and is currently here watching this. So I am a 25-year resident of the Lewiston community with 3 kids that have gone through the school district. I currently have a kindergartner in the PEC. My wife is a graduate of this school. I have a interest in continuing to be proactive in her education moving forward, something I didn't have a chance to do in my previous career. I am a retired HSI supervisory special agent where I supervised an international task force. Again, adhering to obviously the thing that the Board of Education needs to adhere to, and that is the Constitution, federal and state law, and then with the Board of Regents and then the previous policies here set by the board. I'd like to make this a little more interactive than a dialogue on my part. So I'll pass this over to Joe and just be ready for the questions.
Thank you.
Again, thanks everybody for coming out. Part of the main reason I got into this was to get the community more involved. And the 30 or 40 people that I spoke to when I said I was going to run said 2 things. 1, why are you doing that? And 2, hey, nobody comes to the Meet the Candidates meeting, so this is good to see. So I appreciate it, so thank you. My name is Joe Palermo, like I said before. like Jack, I am also a retired law enforcement officer, which brings me to the question, not one donut on that table, right? Listen, I am married 24 years to Jill. Jill is the director of the Lewiston Public Library. She has been there for 33 years. If you can imagine, it was her first job, so she's still there. I have 3 kids. One is graduated in college now. I have my middle child is a 12th grader on her way to Nazareth University in Rochester, playing softball there. I'm very proud of that. And I have a 10th grader who is undecided. I think she's never going to leave home, which I'm fine with. Like I said, I am a retired law enforcement officer. I have currently took a job with the Youngstown Police Department part-time, serving my community. I started a small business with 3 employees. Honestly, to get right to the point, the main reason I decided to do this was I was tired of sitting around and listening to people complain, you know, in their little circles, and I want to be part of the solution. So I'm running, and I hope I serve the board well. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now begin with questions. Again, each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the questions, and we will go in, well, not alternating order, the only one here. All right, so we will begin with question 1.
So my first question is for Ms. Mullen. And yes, sorry. So my first question is for Ms. Mullen. And this comes from a 12th grade student. What is your opinion on this year's budget?
I think it's a pretty easy question. I feel very confident in this year's budget. It was a long process. We hear about budget for months and months and months. I feel that Dr. Lewis and Mr. Casari have done a really excellent job presenting a balanced budget while also being thoughtful about maintaining the programs that are so special to Lew-Port and the ones that we value, while also adding in those extra supports that our kids need right now, the learning, the math TOSAs, the reading TOSAs, and also keeping some of the fun stuff that we are used to, like the ABL classrooms. Even though we are reducing the budget for that, we're still keeping those things within the budget. So I actually feel very confident with this year's budget. Thank you, Bren.
Thank you. And so my next question is for Mr. Wagaman. And this question is, if there was one item that if you had to remove from next year's budget, what would it be?
That's a tough question.
Yeah, that is a tough question.
Kind of glad he got it.
First and foremost, as someone who hasn't sat in the meetings with all of the participating groups of people that needed to be involved in that, it's hard to take one line item out of a budget to say that you want to get rid of it, because what ends up happening is when you remove one thing, there's a ripple effect that affects other programs. So without having that intricate knowledge of having worked on this budget that's about to be passed, or if it passes, but that will come to vote, it's hard to say or cherry pick just one, and I don't think it would be proper to do that.
Yeah. Is it okay if I change the question a little bit then? Can I ask you what's your opinion on this year's budget then?
From the way that it was presented, obviously we want to be fiscally responsible with what we have as far as any tax or revenues coming in. The more dependent we are on state money, the more chance we have of not getting state money also. And if we're dependent on that, it creates an issue where if there's a shortfall, then we're scrambling or having to move money from other program areas to cover that. And that to me would be to a detriment of what program area that was pulled out of to cover that.
Thank you. And then so if final question of the first round is for Mr. Palermo. What new ideas can you bring to the board?
Well, I haven't sat in a board meeting, so as far as new ideas, I don't know what the board has as ideas. What I can bring to the board is my years of service in law enforcement, collaborating with multiple agencies. I was a union negotiator for 4 years and drew up 2 contracts, working with the city of Niagara Falls, collaborating with them, collaborating with the unions and everybody else. So I think what I bring, like I said, I don't know if it's a new thing, but what I would bring is being able to work with multiple facets of people and making concise decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. And then so my next question is for Ms. Mullen, and that is, what do you feel is the biggest issue facing our district today, and what can you do to address that?
I need a minute.
Take your
or
time.
10 seconds maybe. Wow, that's really tough. I think it's good that we are focusing on student well-being emotionally, because I think so many things follow from that. Like if students aren't coming to school feeling okay, being ready to learn, nothing's gonna come after that. So I really feel like that is truly important, and that's my knee-jerk reaction, that we have to make sure that these kids feel okay when they're coming to school, and then they can focus on academics.
Thank you. For Mr. Wagaman, what would you change about the district if you were on the board? I know that's kind of a general question, but.
Probably not let my daughter charge breakfast every morning. That was a surprise bill. Change about the district. And I hate to give this answer again, but I really do need to go back to it. Without being elected to the board and sitting and talking to representation of bargaining units, for the teachers, aides, monitors, even facility staff, to get input or I guess what they're seeing, and the term that I've used several times in speaking to people, boots on the ground, what are they seeing happening? What are their recommendations? Not just to voice displeasure or criticism, but what would their solution be to that, to fix that problem? So I think that's primarily what I would do, is not that I can change anything about it, but to speak to the right people about what they feel needed to be changed. And this also, again, not just limited to on-campus people, but to the community. And to go off topic for 1 second, and Mr. Casari, when you spoke about the tax situation, or the 3% for the hold harmless, the one thing that I would encourage the community to do, then sporadically show up at a meeting, is we've got to bang emails out to Rob Ort, to Angela Morinello. The more that they hear from our community, the more serious they'll take it. The disparity between neighboring districts on what they received and what Lewiston-Porter received is incredible. So we, as a community, we all need to step up our own responsibility with that to make sure that that's addressed.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a good answer.
And so my next question is for Mr. Palermo.
Yes.
You mentioned that you're a former law enforcement officer, so I thought this question was appropriate. Do you feel that the safety in this district is adequate?
Well, I think if we're content with anything, we get lazy. So adequate, I've never really sat down with the Lewiston Police Department or the Youngstown Police Department, but I would say I know that we now have a resource officer, Officer Nicoletti, in the school, and I know that we have a group of administrators and teachers that are a safety committee of some sort. I'm not too familiar with it, but I would say yes. I think we have a great community. I think we're very vigilant, but we could also be better in many ways. I think that's that was one of my big reasons for running, safety of the school. And I want to know what's going on. I want to know what's our plan. Thank you.
Thank you. And then so, Ms. Mullen, my last question for you is what will you do to ensure that student programs aren't cut as the district's enrollment decreases?
I think we have been very strategic in always thinking about student programs and student needs when we are looking at budgets. And we've found creative ways to close budget gaps, as Dr. Lewis and Mr. Casari referenced, through attrition, through retirements. Like, the student experience is always the priority whenever we have budget discussions. It truly is. I mean, we have the necessities that we need to spend money on, but everything else, student needs, are at the forefront of our discussions. So I feel confident that we can keep our programs.
Thank you. My last question for Mr. Wagaman is, as a school board member, what will you do to prioritize academic, arts, and theater programs?
So I'm clear, prioritize them over what?
The question says prioritize academic, art, and theater programs, but I think more of the intent behind it was, are you supportive of Lew-Port's arts, theater, and music programs as well as they relate to academics? Sorry.
Absolutely. With the traditional learning routes, vocational or training learning routes, academic, or with the academics, when we talk about arts and theater also, not everyone is cut from the same cloth. I have two children that are right-handed and athletic. My other child is left-handed and artsy, like my wife. And it's just, I think different kids with the different interests, we need to cultivate that, let that grow, give them, and to use a Lew-Port term, an innovative pathway to success. Keep giving them opportunity where they have the ability to take the initiative to succeed. But the groundwork needs to be there for them.
Thank you.
So the answer to the question is yes. I wouldn't look at getting rid of that.
And last question for Mr. Palermo is, what do you think about Lew-Port's athletic department, and do you think that Lew-Port should offer up more sports in the athletic department?
Well, something I didn't mention before was I've been a part of the Lew-Port athletic program for about 5 years now, coaching girls softball. And actually 5 years ago is when I started thinking about this position. It is a passion of mine. I think it is instrumental in a child's development. So I would say any sport increase is good, especially girls. There is other issues going on with athletics now, mental health issues that really need to be addressed. I know that doesn't really go with that question, but I am passionate about it. So I would say, yes, I would be in support of any type of athletic program for the student body. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now have closing statements. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to sum up any thoughts or cover any material that was not mentioned here. Candidates will go in the opposite order as the opening statements. So we'll have 2 minutes starting with Joseph Palermo.
First, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out. This is a nice turnout, according to what everybody told me on the board. I guess what my closing statement is going to be this. It's going to be a promise. I am an open book. My phone number will be available to anybody. I want the community involved more. I will take phone calls at any time. I was a narcotics detective for a long time. I receive phone calls all throughout the night. So I'm used to it. But this is my promise. I promise that I will make good, concise decisions based on this, based on collaborating with the unions, the administrators, the board, but most importantly, the community. We need to hear more from the community. And then again, listen, I just thank you and thanks for coming out. Thank you.
And I'll close with thank you also. Everything he just said. No, there's a national trend with a divisiveness between community and school boards, and I hope and what I promise and I think what Joe is saying is that we are open minds. We come from jobs that critical thinking under legal and ethical decisions are made routinely. We want there to be civil discussion where all the facts are weighed and considered before decisions. And that includes, again, everyone that would be on campus and the community. We are, we'll see what happens next week, but if we're elected, we are representatives of our community, voices for them as we move forward, but also with the understanding and operating within collective bargaining agreements, the input from the people in the classrooms that are seeing students on a daily basis. One of the things that wasn't touched on was that, and it's concerning through the pandemic, is nationally the student grades and test scores being lower. Our kids were severely affected by the pandemic, and we need to get the resources, maintain the resources, and I don't want to come in and say that I'm a rubber stamp for an open checkbook, but when it comes to children's needs regarding their education, I will be forthright and open about why I've made choices, what I considered, and I'll be grateful for the people that have given their input for my consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Violante, Bryn, and the PTSA for coming and posing such thoughtful questions. I just want to close by saying I always strive to come to the work on the Board of Education with integrity and humility. I want the Board of Education to be seen as approachable and responsive. So I'm just sincerely grateful for any community support that we receive as we continue to do what's best for our kids. So thank you all for coming tonight.
This concludes our Meet the Candidates Night for 2023. On behalf of the PTSA, we would like to thank Bryn Townsend, Mr. Townsend in the High School Social Studies Department, Superintendent Paul Casari, the board candidates, and the community members present this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bryn and Mrs. Violante and the PTSA for putting on the tradition of the Meet the Candidates Night. I've been here at Lewiston-Porter since 2005, and it is a yearly tradition that I think is important that many school districts don't do, where they have this forum where the candidates get a chance to meet and speak to the public. So that concludes our budget hearing and our Meet the Candidates Night. As was mentioned, it was live streamed and it will be available continuing right up through the budget vote. So the Board of Education now needs to go into a work session. We have to go over some policy and things like that. As a result, we will be going into an executive session to discuss a pressing legal matter, and I do anticipate that the board will be coming out of the executive session and taking action tonight. So, and that is listed on the on the work session agenda. So we're going to take about a 15-minute. We'll start at about 7:20. So I come from an Italian background. My great-grandmother and grandmother, they would never allow you to come to their home and not have a coffee and a cookie. So we have coffee and cookies here, and you always got to have it at the table. So I would encourage everybody to please grab a cup of coffee and a cookie before you leave. Have a good night.